SeungJung Kim is currently assistant professor at the Department of History of Art at the University of Toronto. She holds an MA from the University of Virginia and a doctorate from Columbia University in classical art and archaeology. Her first PhD is in astrophysics from Princeton. Her previous training in astrophysics engendered a fascination with time, which she has brought to bear on her research in Greek art. Her main research interest, explored in her forthcoming book entitled Toward a Phenomenology of Time in Ancient Greek Art, involves concepts of time and temporality in the visual culture of archaic and classical Greece, in sculpture, base painting, and monumental painting, which she contextualizes to the larger cultural history, bridging philosophical, social, literary, and scientific understandings in ancient Greece. Her interest in the phenomenology of visual perception has engaged her actively with contemporary film theory, and she also harbors a secondary interest in the art of Gandhara and various cross-cultural currents that bridge the East and West. She has published articles on both Dionysiac motifs and classical iconography of the Nereids in Gandharan Buddhist art. Kim is also a passionate teacher, and she is constantly finding ways to incorporate new digital technologies in her award-winning teaching, as she involves herself in various aspects of digital humanities at the university. Her Korean language textbook, Understanding Greek Civilization, from 2016, was awarded the National Prize for Excellence in the nonfiction category. An archaeologist by training who has conducted archaeological fieldwork in southern Sicily and at the sanctuary of Poseidon at Kestos near Thebes, Dr. Kim has served in the past 4 years as the president of the Archaeological Institute of America, Toronto Society. And she's looking to bring local archaeological communities into dialogue with the academic communities, also engaging in broader outreach programs with the Royal Ontario Museum to raise knowledge-based ethical awareness and youth education. And so we are very grateful. She's also serving as a board member, a representative from the University of Toronto for the Canadian Institute in Greece. And so we're very happy to have her tonight, and so I will turn the mic over to SeungJung Kim.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And we're going to leave archaeology for the moment. And by way of advanced apology, I'm kind of recovering from a flu, and so I took some strong medicine, and if I fall asleep in the middle of the talk, then please excuse me and don't think that I'm just bored with my own talk. So. Okay. One rainy weekend afternoon a few years back, I decided last minute to join a group of filmmaker friends to a film screening of When Night Falls by LIANG, which was part of a program titled Chinese Realities at MoMA. Knowing nothing about the film, I took a quick glance at the internet link where some phrases caught my eye. Observational documentary techniques and withering portraits of ordinary Chinese caught in the webs of injustice. Okay, a low-budget narrative film made to look like a documentary, I thought, and probably really depressing. And sure enough it was. It was about a mother whose innocent son was wrongly framed and sentenced to death by the state, and her helpless struggle against the jarring institutional injustice. Yes, the reality in China is grim. And yes, it's unthinkable to lose a child. But the film wasn't particularly successful, in my opinion. The unprofessional acting, its slow pace, and aesthetic disinterest utterly failed to engage me. And frankly, I was kind of bored halfway through. Now, the film concluded with a placid voiceover by the mother announcing that her son is dead, executed by the state. Pictures of a young man flashed on the screen in the manner of a commemorative slideshow. I was still unmoved by all these elaborately constructed lies. The screen went black, and the credits rolled up. But then, I caught the section under the bold letters, "Special Thanks To," and started seeing names scrolling past, which were, to my utter horror, the same names of the actual protagonists that I had become accustomed to hearing during the past 70 minutes. Hold on, I thought, wait, these people are real? My own experiential peripeteia manifested right then and there when I realized that what I had just witnessed was a real story of a real mother who valiantly fought for her real son, who was really put to death in 2008 in Beijing, where I had even visited a month prior. Those pictures tears were of the real Yang Jia before his execution, and it kept on swimming in my head. The epiphanic rush of guilt-ridden empathy, wondering how I could have been so unaware of its actuality, made me reel with uncontrollable emotions, letting go of the urge to fight back the rush of tears, which felt all the more stinging on my cheeks due to their complete unexpectedness, and hence the lack of tissues in my possession. I was simply crushed, leaving the theater to join my friends with swollen and reddened eyes, and all I could say was, I didn't know. That such a radical shift in my perception of, as well as my emotional engagement with the work, was solely due to its relationship to actuality could not have been demonstrated more clearly with any controlled experiment. It is proven to me unequivocally that we're so deeply accustomed to the structural differences in the way we engage with an aesthetic or visual experience, depending on its relationship to actuality, so much so that most of the time we don't even realize it. And so, it prompted me to look at the rise of Greek Historienbilder with a fresh perspective and its revolutionary effect from the observer's point of view, which is the subject of my talk today, to understand the novel impact of the first representations of actuality in the visual arts of Greece. It has long been recognized that the ancient Greeks, unlike their Roman counterparts, were notoriously obsessed with their mythographic tradition, avoiding representations of actuality at all costs. We need not look further than the famed Parthenon to understand their deep-seated penchant for cloaking historical events under a mythological or epic guise. Here, the Trojan War becomes a paradigm for the recent victory in the Persian Wars. The Amazons, an appropriate stand-in for the hubristic Persians who sacked the Acropolis, and the centaurs and giants, a symbol of the chaos that had to be conquered through divine and orderly intervention. At the dawn of democracy in the late 6th and early 5th centuries, however, a new trend emerged in the visual culture of Greece: visual representations of actuality in monumental form. Contemporary or historical events, or public personages, such as the Tyrannicides or the Battle of Marathon, began to be commemorated for the first time. Of the first statues of Harmodius and Aristogiton by Antenor, commemorating their act of slaying Hipparchus in 514 BCE and hailed as heroes of democracy and bringers of isonomia, could have been set up in the Agora as early as the Cleisthenes reforms of 507. And of course here I'm showing you the later replacement because we don't actually have the original Antenor sculpture. This blatant public artistic commemoration of historical individuals in over life-size statuary, fresh in everyone's memory as living human beings, was a singular act without precedent in the entire Greek world. And the Battle of Marathon, fought mainly by the Athenians in 490 BC, was a pivotal event in the Persian Wars, not only ending the first Persian invasion of Greece, but also marking the beginning of the eventual Greek triumph. That it was painted and displayed in the Stoa of Achille in less than 3 decades after the event means not only those that harbored personal, physical memories of the battle would have still been alive, but also the immediate kin, close relatives, and neighbors of the individual participants. There's no doubt the psychological impact of this unprecedented, vivid, large-scale painting, directly connected to one's own personal memory, would have nothing short of astounding. Tonio Horscher, who coined the term Historienbilder for these images of historical actuality, recognized that they differed from mythological or epic subjects, which may have still been considered history by the Greeks themselves, but carried significant temporal distance. Horscher sees this emerging mode of visual commemoration as deeply rooted in the political motivation behind the new form of a democratic government. But can we be satisfied with the narrow causal framework regarding the visual arts purely in the service of politics to explain the sudden interest in depicting actual events? What about other media that may not have a direct causal relationship with politics, such as vase painting, where contemporary depiction of the Persian Wars and many other images of actual events, daily lives, or reference to contemporaneous characters surge in popularity? Could we, in fact, identify a more general framework with which the phenomenon can be understood within the larger socio-cultural context? Discontent with Horscher's dichotomy between the mytho-epic and the contemporary historical there's been a symptomatic scholarly tendency to revert back to the prevailing view that the Greeks were, quote-unquote, in the grip of the past, following Bernard van Groningen's well-referenced treatise of the same title. Routinely acknowledged, the overarching attitude of ancient Greece was to favor the past, locating models of behavior in past exempla and heroic traditions, rather than focusing on the present or the future. As such, scholars have repeatedly treated the two most conspicuous cases, namely the Tyrannicides and the Marathon painting, as exceptions to the rule. Thus, the representations of Harmodius and Aristogiton are explained in terms of their elevation into the spatium mythicum, focusing on their identity as bona fide heroes with a cult. And the Battle of Marathon became the natural conclusion to the temporal sequence of a long list of epic deeds. In other words, a newly forged mythical paradigm. This paper, on the other hand, seeks to first reinstate the novelty of Historienbilder's ontological status as contemporary subject matters, having emerged from a long and categorical avoidance of visual representations of actuality. And second, recontextualize Historienbilder beyond their narrow political implications within societal notions of time, and namely a distinct interest in the immediacy of the present moment. And third, place them in the landscape of visual representations that signal a novel relationship with time, and explore the embodied nature of these new types of images through the lens of phenomenology, shifting the focus to their reception by the contemporary viewer. Now, our first stop is the celebrated Croesus amphora in Lviv, attributed to Myson and dated to circa 490, known for its unusual historical representation of the fall of Croesus. The mid-6th century Lydian king sits on an elaborate throne, perched atop a pyre ablaze with flames kindled by his servant labeled Eupharmus. Croesus himself solemnly pours the libation, following the trajectory of his own inscribed name. This is no doubt the fateful moment when Cyrus took Sardis in 546 BCE, and Croesus, about to perish, is miraculously saved at the very last minute after Cyrus hears him call out the name of Solon, and we're all very familiar with the story. Both Herodotus and Thucydides tell the story of divine intervention, either by Apollo, who sends rain, or Zeus, who shrouds him in a cloud. Predating both literary accounts, however, Myson's treatment shows no inkling of the dramatic reversal that is yet to come. This clever mission is most likely a deliberate pictorial narrative strategy to arouse suspense, while conveniently enhancing the reality of the historical subject. The immediacy of Croesus' impending doom, when seeing the flames spread evenly across the pyre and continue to rise, makes the scene unbearable to watch, as if one could hear the ticking clock on the time bomb. In contrast to the conspicuously historical subject of Croesus, the other side of this phase shows an enthralling tableau of a well-known mythological scene of Theseus abducting the Amazon Antiope, with the help of his pal Eurystheus. Myson's spotlight treatment of the three actors, as if on a stage, telescopes the narrative display into a narrow temporal span, the crucial moment of the getaway. All three look sharply back over their shoulders while they run from the Amazon reinforcements, towards which the captive Antiope desperately reaches out. The conspicuous absence of the Amazon sisters here contrasts with their conventional participation in other representations by the artists of the same subject. So, in a similar manner as the Croesus panel, therefore, the deliberate omission of certain narrative elements prolongs the urgency of the moment and arouses in the viewer a strong sense of impending attack from the invisible chasers, lurking, most likely, just outside the pictorial field. Several scholars have long noted that the two sides of the Croesus amphora carry deeper semantic connections, which is not surprising given that Myson, a people of the pioneers who regularly experimented with the pictorial space at their disposal, was actually quite fond of uniting the two sides of his vases. Echoing John Boardman's politicized readings of similar monuments, David Francis posits that the Athenian hero's abduction of the provides a mythical template for the historical capture of Sardis in 498 BCE. As the sole offensive action as part of the Ionian revolt, this victory, won jointly by Athens and Eretria, would explain the subject's prominent representation of the latter's temple of Apollo. And if so, the Louvre Amphora shows the fall of Sardis on 2 occasions. Cyrus's capture of Croesus in 547, and the Ionians taking it back 50 years later. As uncanny as this thesis might seem, it effectively encouraged the conventional reading that the unique representation of Croesus, in analogy to the Theseus panel, was only possible because of the subject's elevation into the mythical territory. In J.S. Evans' words, quote, "By the 5th century at least, Croesus had become a figure of myth who stood outside the conventional restraints of chronology," end quote. The blatant anomaly against the mythographic tradition of Greek vase painting becomes then conveniently explained away by attributing a kind of ignorance or indiscrimination on the part of the Greeks. Another explanation postulates a lost tragedy about Croesus, and this again deprives vase painting of its agency for innovation. But in fact, we need not look far to encounter an abundance of battle scenes that are clearly inspired by contemporary or recent events of actuality. The repertoire of Greeks fighting Persians appear on vase painting as early as 490 and stays popular until the mid-century. Notably, a dynamic duel scene depicted on the Boston Oinokri by the Chicago painter features a nude Greek warrior and a Persian archer in combat. It displays again an exceptional temporal sensitivity with which the scene elaborates the fateful split-second action of the Greek about to spear through the Persian. The latter has drawn his sword as a desperate last-minute measure, but from his precarious stance, we know it's already too late. And, in fact, his first attempt to shoot the arrow has failed. This arrow, missing the Greek, still caught in mid-flight, informs us instinctively how rapidly the tables were turned. The historical specificity of the Croesus Amphora has encouraged exceptional treatment, differentiated not only from generic unnamed battles seen as such, but also from scenes that portray some aspects of contemporary life. Let us focus, however, not on the Croesus Amphora's exceptional quality, but on its continuity with the rising practice of vase painting that show ample awareness of both historical and everyday realities. One simply has to consider that many of such vases, as we now turn to the pioneer group, conventionally regarded as depicting everyday reality, could also be thought of as historical had they come with proper contextual information. The famous Archaean crater by Euphrosyne, harboring the iconic portrayal of the Iliadic scene, pairs with the seemingly contemporary scene on its reverse. Athenian youths, as you see here, arming as hoplites, are variously named Hypericus, Hippos, Megon, Acastos, and Mexicos. Each name is attested in Attic history, but its potential reference to any historical circumstance has certainly been lost to us. Similarly, the artist's Calyx crater in Berlin also features named athletes and trainers. The infibrillating youth on the far left side has the name Liabris springing from his head, predicated with the word Pylos, and he is in the company of other named youths whose identities once again elude us. And side B of Euphronius' Antaios crater at the Louvre shows a certain Polypus about to take the stand and play the aulos in front of judges, who was in all probability a proud winner of a musical contest and thus a relatively well-recognized local phenomenon. Named athletes feature heavily amongst historically specific individuals on Greek vase painting. At least 3 vases by Euphrosyne and 1 each by the Bodian eye painter and Phintias portray the athlete Pylos of Croton, identified by inscription, 3-time victor at the Pythian Games and known for his later participation in the Battle of Salamis in 480. One of these vases even show his head framed between the widely spread letters that spell Kalos, as if the portrait head of PYLOS acts as the pictorial subject for the verbal predicate. PYLOS is certainly not unique amongst named athletes on vases, nor were the athletes the only ones acknowledged in this way. While we may not be certain which of the hundreds of inscribed names common from the late 6th century onward are factual or fictive, there's a good sense that the identity and context of many of these names, which do represent actual people, are simply lost to us. Some, however, are historical figures with whom we are familiar, such as Anacreon and Sappho, whose love songs were the mainstay in the practice of the symposium. So too are the 16 occurrences of the pioneer's so-called potter portraits, a unique phenomenon in the history of Greek vase painting whereby the artists represented themselves and their colleagues on their vases. For example, Smikros, hailed as beautiful, reclines at a symposium, and is depicted once each by Euphroneus, Oltos, and even Smikros himself, as you can see here. This is supposedly the first self-portrait in the history of Western art. Euphroneus, too, is shown to be courting the very Liagros, whose name we have seen done in so many vases with the predicate kolos. Phintius, on the other hand, paints a music lesson in which Euthymides is labeled as the youthful pupil. And moreover, right above this music lesson on the shoulder of the vase, two hetairai play the kotobos, and one of them calls out his name, "This is for you, beautiful Euthymides." How different, we may ask, is the Croesus amphora from other late archaic vases that portray historical or contemporary individuals? Why should the story of Croesus be considered quasi-mythical, while presumably the famous poetry contest of Archaic and Sappho from around the same time would not? What about Polyclis's Aulus contests, which may have occurred much more recently? Is the political implication of Croesus' downfall really so different from battle scenes inspired by the Persian wars, or the named citizen of Athens arming themselves for an important event, or the numerous portraits of specific athletes in action, their named trainers, reclining symposiasts, or the favorite hetairai of the time? Where do we draw the line between what we call historical and what is considered genre scenes of everyday life? So, seen against the rising trend in the general landscape of late archaic vase painting, the Croesus amphora strikes noticeable not for its idiosyncrasy, nor as a sole example of Historienbilder, which otherwise didn't exist in vase painting, but for its continuity with the broad spectrum of vase-painted imagery, and as a culmination of a sharply growing interest of representing recent past and contemporary human actors. Now, concurrent with such a trend is a rising sensitivity to the temporality of image, and we saw some of that occurring before. Whether it is arresting a particular pregnant moment in time, or using the topology of the medium to effectively manipulate temporal access to certain parts of the narrative in order to arouse suspense. I have argued in my forthcoming book that these trends are particularly well conveyed by new pictorial strategies at the turn of the century that highlight the corporeal struggle against the force of gravity, be it through complex spatial temporal coordination of jumping figure, or the strain of lifting heavy objects, or the instinctive desire to catch a dropping object. The late 6th century and early 5th century BCE saw a breakthrough in the visual arts. A new kind of temporality was articulated by facilitating sensory modes of viewing through bodily understanding and allowing viewers to intuitively feel time. And an image like this kind of drives home the point that I'm trying to make, and that when you see the image, you basically see that it activates bodily memory, and in this case, something of the lifting action, which is kind of self-referential. The growing interest in contemporary subject matters, articulated by the Historienbilder phenomenon, not only coincides with the rising societal preoccupation with the present moment in human history, but it can also be put into a larger trend of a new temporal sensitivity in the landscape of later archaic and early classical visual culture hinges on the phenomenology of viewing. Now, the following two conspicuous case studies of the Tyrannicides group and the marathon painting will demonstrate that this radical new imagery taps into the phenomenological realm of embodied new viewing modes, either through bodily emulation or identification, or engaging the cognitive function of memory, both personal and collective, reinforced by the artwork's physical surroundings. The widespread practice of emulating or identifying with the Tyrannicides is no better demonstrated by the so-called harmonious scholia, a set of 4 drinking songs transmitted by Athenaeus, dating closely to the erection of the statues themselves. Repetition and variation characterize these four-line stanzas, invoking the informal setting of the symposium. 2 of the scholia start with the same 2 lines, as you see here. I will carry my sword in a mortal bow, just like Harmodius in Aristogiton. The evocation of the myrtle branch is here doubly significant, because we already know that these branches were passed from one singer to the next as they sung the scholia. Hence, the first person statement opening, I will carry my sword in a myrtle bough, as he physically holds the myrtle branch, transforms the singer of these harmonious scholia into virtually reenacting the heroic deed of the Tyrannicides. This very performance of the harmonious scholia thus funnels the recent historical memory into the present durée of the performer as he himself molds his words in an impromptu rhetoric that will dictate his future ideology. And the metonymic usage of Harmodius to refer to the songs themselves, so we call these songs the Harmodius itself, attests to the centrality of the Eromenos as both the object of desire as well as assimilation. In other words, to sing the Harmodius meant to reenact the historical deed as Harmodius himself. The Tyrannicides sculpture group by Critias and Hesiotis, set up in the Agora in 477 BCE, replacing the older Antino groups carried on by Xerxes to Susa, is often taken to signal the advent of the early classical style. I'm just showing you also the last reconstruction because the Naples one actually has the reconstruction that's on wrong. Oh, you're correct, sorry, that was wrong. The tight-knit structure of the 2-persons group presents a dynamic composition with a variety of viewing points, offering ample opportunities for the spectator to engage in a kind of role-playing. First, from the frontal position, the viewer offers himself to the direct engagement of their gazes, momentarily lending his body to the role of Hipparchus, thus participating in the historical narrative, the precarious split-second moment before the sword of Harmodius comes bashing down on his head. The original position of the statue group has been conjectured as one of 2 places by cross-referencing Pausanias with other sources and extant remains of known Agora landmarks. Both positions are along the Panathenaic Way, close to the actual spot where the historical action took place. So the ideological political message, especially to the Panathenaic processioners, who would have had to pass through the position in which Hipparchus once stood, would have appeared blatantly obvious as a cautionary note against tyranny. The phenomenology of subjecting oneself to the role of the victim in public iconography of the Tyrannicides is also attested from a decree from Erythrae in Asia Minor. This is dated to about 334 BCE, mandating repairs to a statue of a Tyrannicide. It actually specifies the replacement of a sword that had at one time been removed by the oligarchs because they thought that the stance was aimed entirely at themselves. The truly revolutionary approach the Tyrannicides group offers by way of kinesthetic viewing comes to light once the viewer slips away from playing the soon-to-be-dead tyrant. At this point, a dazzling array of movements exhibit themselves to the viewer, and I have here a very low-tech way of showing you this, so please exercise your imagination because I don't have a turntable. Aristogaton's chlamys spreads itself open like a stage curtain being drawn, behind which bodies hide, and then from which they appear. The torsos twist and turn to make themselves bulkier or slimmer. The legs open up to a wider stance and close their distance as daintily as a ballet dancer. Weapons conceal and reveal themselves to the viewer's alarm, until, of course, one body is completely hidden behind the other, offering the complete profile viewpoint of a single striding figure. Moving from doomed tyrant to dazzled spectator, the viewer is now finally invited to participate wholeheartedly in becoming a harmonious or an Aristoteton. The all-around viewing mode of this statue group, standing at the heart of the civic center of the Opera, is ensured by law, which banned against setting up other statues in their immediate vicinity. Pictorial quotations of the statue support this freedom of viewpoints, showing the two figures inhabit all possible iterations in their relative position to each other. So in each cases, you see Harmodius or Aristoteton leading, or one is in front of the other, and there seems to be no consistency. Now this freedom encourages the active mode of role-playing and identification, as it is attested in the well-known passage in Lysistrata by Aristophanes. And this is how it goes. These women won't set up a tyranny over me, for I'll stay on guard, and I'll carry my sword in a mortal bow. I'll stand to arms in the Agora beside Aristoteton. Like this, I'll stand beside him. For this way I can slap on the jaw this hag hated by the gods. The old man of the chorus, besieging the Acropolis taken by the tyrannical women, is literally doing the Harmodius by singing a snatch from the Harmodius Scholia and enacting the pose of the Harmodius stance. From the phrase Hode, as you see here, we gather that the decrepit old man, rather comically, is physically emulating the sexy archback pose of the youthful Harmodius, vowing to stand up in arms against the quote-unquote tyranny like that of Hippias. And of course the pun here is referring to the tyranny of a gang of old horsey ladies. And of course, these empty words lead to no effectual action, as they are immediately rebuffed by the women's more potent, scalding, and emasculating threats. Another important evidence for emulating the Tyrannicides comes shortly thereafter in the form of a public oath written on a stele in front of the old Bouleuterian. In 410 and 409 BCE, following the short-lasting oligarchic coup of 411 and the restoration of democracy after the assassination of Phrynichus, the Athenians passed a decree posed by DEMOPHANTUS, re-establishing laws against tyranny and mandating an oath to be taken by all citizens. The extraordinary first-person oath taken collectively by tribes and deans starts with the powerful words, "I will kill with word, deed, vote, and my own hand, if I can, anyone who subverts the democracy in Athens." The oath continues to declare, "If anyone dies in the act of killing a tyrant or in the attempt, I will honor him and his children like Harmodius and Aristoteton and their descendants." Recited yearly before the Dionysia, the Oath of Demophantus is regarded as a decisive political moment for the Athenian citizenry in the aftermath of an oligarchic revolution. The collective, yet individual, performance articulated by the unambiguous first-person language and the effective promise to literally become a tyrannicide forms the basis of the act of emulation that is predicated on the premise of attainability. To reiterate, it is the historical actuality of Harmodius and Aristoteton's existence and their humanity that allows such close adoration and commitment to emulate their deeds, quite unlike any divine or heroic figure in the temporally distant mythic past. And we know by the 4th century, songs that mock the Tyrannicides were prevalent enough to establish laws banning them, and the existence of alternative traditions criticizing the Tyrannicides for their personal erotic motives is clear from Thucydides' treatment of the event. Moreover, Vincent Azoulay, in his most recent 2017 study of the Tyrannicides, poignantly reminds us that the prevailing assumption that an actual cult of the Tyrannicides was established by the early 5th century is, quote, "a modern hypothesis that is nowhere corroborated by the ancient sources," end quote. The first ritual activity involving the Tyrannicides is attested in late 4th century, and even then, he reminds us that this does not guarantee the existence of a tyrannicide cult, per se. The act of reciting the oath with the explicit invocation of Harmonious and Aristogaton, presumably in the Agora, with the sightline to their statues, would have been a deeply phenomenological exercise, reinforced by the collective verbal and visual embodiment. The pervasive iconography of the Harmonious stance became a visual icon mimicked by other represented figures in Athenian visual culture, as we see here in the case of Theseus. You can see here he's reenacting a Harmonious stance. And here, the same goes with the Aristogaton. And at the same time, in Josiah Ober's words, this stance, quote, served as a synecdoche for the monument, the event, and its imagined narrative continuation. In other words, to imagine oneself in the pose of the Tyrannicides was considered equivalent to taking up the defense of democracy against tyranny, evidenced in Lysistrata when the old men take their stand beside Aristogaton. The explicit physical emulation and role-playing within the context of the society on various levels of public and private spheres, such as the homoerotic recharge symposium, must have heavily nuanced the way in which the Tyrannicide group was perceived, and thus cannot be isolated from the cognitive processes that occur in the collective memory of a society and the individual's cultural and political experiences. Finally, we come to the Stokoi Kile, located on the northern border of the Athenian Agora, just beyond the Amazon Lake. Famous for the large-scale panel paintings it once housed, this Kimonian monument, dated to the 460s, was a completely secular commission, unlike his other major buildings that also housed monumental painting. And here is the historical Battle of Marathon, less than a generation removed from the event, and depicted for the first time in the history of Athens on a spectacular and unprecedented scale. According to Pausanias, 3 other paintings were hanging next to the Marathon painting. First, the Battle of Archaic, in which the Spartans and Athenians are lining up for battle. And then we have Athenians and Theseus fighting with the Amazons. This is followed by the Greeks when they have taken Troy. And finally, described in most detail, is the full-on Battle of Marathon. Now, the Amazonarchy, Iliopursis, and Battle of Marathon have all been established as standard iconography in the 5th century, but the otherwise historically unattested battle at the Archaic remains to this day one of the most difficult conundrums of classical history, despite decades of scholarly tension. No 2 scholars seem to agree as to whether this battle at Oinoi was a historical one or a mythological one, a contemporary battle at the time of Timon, or that of some other date. In the interest of time, I will simply present 2 solutions which are particularly germane for the implication for its viewership. And the first one is this, an interesting solution proposed by Francis and Vickers, despite the one sticky issue of having to attribute a rather significant blunder to Pausanias, argues that the scene takes place not in the Argive oinoi, but rather in the Attic oinoi, where the Athenians and Plataeans, not the Spartans, joined forces before the main battle at Marathon. So this scenario has several distinct advantages, one of which is the spatio-temporal unity of bookending the mythological narratives with the before and after of a single historical event. So both of these, this and this, would be part of the Battle of Marathon. The physical juxtaposition of the Battle of Marathon with the Amazonarchy and the Iliopursis in the middle, as well as the inclusion of divine and heroic figures as overseers in the Marathon painting. Scholars have never hesitated to read a mythical paradigm in the Marathon episode, elevating it to a timeless epic deed. But instead of distancing the event from historical memory, I propose a reverse reading, that through the indexical nature of the historical recitation of Marathon, the mythological panels framed in between the 2 historical panels are brought down to reality, made into a vivid display before the viewer, presentified and relived in a complex web of visual and physical memory, association, and assimilation. And we know the generals, including Timon's own father Miltiades, were supposedly painted in their recognizable likenesses, which would have definitely further aided in this process. If we accept Francis and Vickers' solution, the visitor to the Stoa would have encountered first the preparation for the battle, a suspenseful prelude to the narration of the battle as a whole. And note that the leftmost position in the Stoa geographically coincides with Oinoi being actually in the west of Marathon proper. And he walks to the right. He would then witness a kind of flashback into a legendary past involving Timon's ancestral Theseus, and then his son's exploits in Troy. The suspense is prolonged until finally it cuts back to the explosive onset of the Battle of Marathon, and Marathon is geographically located east of Oinoi, so this all kind of makes sense, in sort of the geography. And when we come to the Marathon painting proper, the viewer would then witness a progressive narrative unfolding before his eyes. And by progressive narrative, I kind of mean this. So Pausanias' three-part description of the Marathon painting makes it very clear that from the onset of the battle, the plain of Marathon in the beginning, then we move to the Persians being in the marshes here in the middle, and then finally we move to the end where the Persians fleeing to their ships on the edge of the water. So in fact, there's both a temporal, through time, and through location, a progression from one end of the painting to the other end. And thus, the entire experience of walking along this 4-meter tall painting would have been not unlike a cinematic one, right? Only it's the person who's moving rather than the image. And the geographically coordinated movement as it progressing with the battle in time and space would have greatly enhanced participatory awareness. And remember, still fresh in Athenians' collective memory, where many of the surviving participants of the battle would have still been living, the effect of this embodied experience would have been truly revolutionary. The important consequence of Francis and Vicker's reconstruction is that it turns the whole building into something of a monument dedicated entirely to the Battle of Marathon. And the vista framed by the Stoa colonnade, as you look out toward the Agora and the Acropolis, and here you're going to have to just imagine that there's columns here, because this I commissioned to my dear mother, and she's still working on it. And so when you look at the colonnade, looking out toward the Agora and the Acropolis, we would have seen the contemporary colossal statue of Athena Promachos by Phidias rising above the Acropolis, lying in ruins. This would have sent a powerful symbolic message of victory over the Persians and the glory of those who fought at Marathon, especially if we were to take Pausanias' testimony to heart that the Promachos statue was erected from the spoils of Marathon. The entire Stoa in this manner thus turns itself into something of a theatrical frame, which supported an elaborate visual program that interfaced spatially with its physical surroundings and temporally with the memory of the historical Battle of Marathon. So we have a literal window to the ruins of the Acropolis, where the tangible result of the victory is seen. The Stoa also provided an equally impressive pictorial window to the narrative of the battle itself, oriented geographically towards the actual location of Marathon. And closer by, over here, curiously on axis with the Stoa would have been the statues of the Tyrannicides, which, as a replacement for the first group by Antenor, served as a symbol of rebirth and Athenian resilience against the hubristic Persians, who had sacked the city and purloined the original statues. The dialogue between the Stoa paintings and the Tyrannicide group thus takes place on multiple registers, including, no doubt, Timon's own political agenda, which would have been served by paying homage to the most venerated and adored heroes of the time. Because, after all, as this has become clear more and more, it was the Tyrannicide's unique historicity that was most certainly the model for Miltiades' commemoration as such by his son. And we're almost there. Now, the second reconstruction by Mark Stansbury O'Donnell gives us another provocative and compelling reconstruction of the Stoa paintings by attributing the Oinoi panel not as part of the original Communion program, but as a later addition during the Peloponnesian War. So namely, that the Oinoi painting depicts the first Athenian defense against the invading Spartans at the better known Oinoi on the Boeotian Attic border, marking the beginning of the Archidamian War in 431. Stansbury O'Donnell's solution turned the Stoa Poikile into a palimpsest of historical commemoration, this time by Cleon, who, with the dedication of the shields taken from Spectaria and Scione on the other end wall, frames the mytho-historical program centered on Marathon with a much more recent historical event. Now, this bolder focus on present affairs towards the later 5th century is well documented, in fact, by Francis Dunn, who, through compelling literary analyses, argues for a growing societal attitude centered on the rapidly changing uncertainties of the present, while rejecting the authority of the past. He terms this phenomenon the quote-unquote present shock in the late 5th century, an analogy with Alvin Toffler's well-known future shock that characterized the cultural upheavals and rapid rate of change seen in the 1960s, and some of you may remember that. The Spartan shields, taken by Cleon as war booty from the Pylian triumph, and what we're seeing here is one of those that were actually created in the Agora by Leslie Shear, provide additional confirmation for the inherent connection between the Agora and the Acropolis and the importance of sightlines in the overall experience of the Stoic Chile. In Aristophanes' Knights, produced a year after Cleon's victory at Sphacteria, Cleon is shown boasting his brilliant defeat of the Spartans at PYLOS, which would silence his enemies once and for all, as long as the shields from PYLOS remained visible. Recently, Mike Lippmann and others have convincingly argued that the bulk of the 120 Spartan shields would have been hanging on the 99 cuttings, regularly dispersed around the Nike Temple bastion, and prominently visible both from the Pnyx Hill, where Cleon's statement was supposedly delivered, as well as from the Stoic Chile and the Agora. And, so we have 99 cuttings and 120 shields that we know were taken, so that leaves about 20 shields to be hung in the Stoic Chile as seen by Pausanias. The shields dedicated in the Stoa, therefore, by way of direct sideline to their counterpart covering the Nike Temple bastion, would have acted as a direct index to the ultimate symbol of Athenian victory on the Acropolis. Herodotus' famous anecdote regarding the first factual drama in ancient history, the fall of Miletus by Phrynichus, which was likely produced only 2 years after the Ionian city fell in 494 BCE, makes clear that the embodied viewing experience of actuality could be something of a shock to those who weren't accustomed to such presentified, vivid displays of real events. The whole audience supposedly burst into tears in a theater, fining the playwright 1,000 drachmas and banning any future production for reminding them of the calamity that was their very own. A similar response is recorded in modern cinema's founding myth regarding the Lumiere brothers' 50-second film, capturing the arrival of a train in the station, which apparently caused mass panic as the audience jumped from their seats or ran out of the theater. And it kind of goes on like this for 50 minutes, and we don't see it like that, but perhaps then it was quite shocking. Modern film theories also posit a different kind of phenomenological identification when viewing either a narrative film, a documentary film, or a homemade video, as when consciousness progressively sees the underlying referent through the image displayed rather than at the cinematic object, tapping into our familiarity and prior living memory of what is represented. So just shortly, very briefly, if you're watching a superhero movie, you're watching at the image. And this is called lateral consciousness if you knew that that's what you're seeing. But then when you're watching a video of your son in last year, when he's doing his last year's birthday, you're not really watching at the image, right? But you're watching through that image and transported back to the event the year prior. Right? And that, Jean-Pierre Méliès calls this longitudinal consciousness. And actually, if you're interested, Vivian Sobchak has a very digestible, sort of accessible digest on this subject matter. And Roland Barthes actually called this consciousness the quote-unquote junta. So, it is high time we stop alienating our ancient Greek predecessors by ascribing them an inability to discriminate between fact and fiction. And finally, to try and understand the perceptual framework with which they, just like us, would have related to images of reality. And in conclusion, and we're done here almost, the phenomenon of Historienbilder is, I argue, not an isolated, brief interlude in the history of art in which actuality was politically elevated by way of revelation, but that it was, in fact, one of many changes that was initiated in the visual arts of late Archaic and early classical period, signaling a novel relationship between time and the image, one that effectively focuses on the present moment, pregnant with contingency and human agency. And the ancient Greeks had a special name for this type of temporality, calling it pylos, meaning the opportune time or the right time, and he was worshipped as a divinity starting in the 5th century. And what you're seeing on screen here is the later Lysippin personification that is reconstructed in 3D, just so that I have a pretty image to show. But this, of course, is for a whole other talk, so thank you so much for your patience.
We'll have a reception afterwards, and you can, of course, talk to our speaker. But maybe we do have a few questions if anyone would like to start a discussion.
Why the term lateral consciousness? Why would it be lateral?
Because you're associating just on the surface of the images. Like as the time goes by, you're watching the film. You're just sort of jumping from time, like the very moment by moment. Whereas longitudinal consciousness will kind of bring you back into memory, right? I mean, I think that's but yeah. Are you all convinced?
It's a great way of just looking at things that have been familiar to some of us for a long time, and we've taught them in our classes, and we can rethink the way we teach them in the future. I certainly learned a lot from this lecture, and I think that was great. So, please join us all for